Takeru Hokuzono's Kagurabachi is the most recent example of a manga that's on a meteoric rise, and a story that possesses all of the pieces necessary to be considered a rising star within the magazine. And with many of Shonen Jump's most beloved and veteran mangaka concluding their stories in the foreseeable future, I think that this magazine needs a hero. And as far as I'm concerned, we need look no further than Chihiro Rokuhira and the story of Kagurabachi to find one. For all those unaware, Kagurabachi is an extremely new, ongoing manga published in Weekly Shonen Jump that has absolutely taken the internet and Japan by storm. Due to what can only be chalked up to sheer coincidence and the internet doing what the internet does, this manga heavily picked up steam in the community through memes and jokes about it essentially being the second coming of manga Christ. And while it certainly isn't there quite yet, what I will say is that the actual quality of the story is getting significantly closer to that meme than I initially thought. Because of this, Kagurabachi and Hokuzono as a result has started with a leg up on many other newly published works and authors in the magazine, as even if only for a joke, people were and are interested in the story, and they still are curious to see how true the joke really is. Unfortunately for other competent authors and artists in the magazine, one of the most difficult things to accomplish is getting eyes on any particular series. Even if the quality speaks for itself in the best of cases, it holds very little value to their career if they're incapable of enticing and at least getting the bare minimum interest of an audience. Without that, the manga could be a 10 out of 10, but with no readers, it won't continue being published in the magazine. Due to Kagurabachi essentially sidestepping that whole process by way of really silly jokes, I think that this story has gotten the chance to stand on its own and demonstrate its quality for all to see. Much of the fight for the attention and audience that other editors make their mangaka aware of was simply less necessary for Hokuzono, and as a result, propelled him much quicker to being a potential candidate to be one of the authors that Shonen Jump relies on. Now, in order to be what I'd call the new face of Shonen Jump, 3 conditions have to be cleared, with the first and most important condition hinging on the popularity and sales to substantiate its existence in the culture. Without the sales and commercial success necessary, the quality of your manga won't mean much because your story won't get in front of enough eyes. I'll go into more detail on this later in the video, but the quality of the series is certainly important and adds a large degree of staying power, but you can only be viewed as a flagship series first by getting the attention of a massive number of people. And to put it simply, Hokuzono may have struck gold with his series in that regard. We're not seeing Demon Slayer numbers from this manga just yet, but Kagurabachi has certainly achieved the bare minimum to get its foot in the door. The memes brought this series into the forefront of people's minds in the West, creating a hype so strong for a short amount of time that it even affected how this manga was viewed in Japan. The fact that the noise generated over here was enough to penetrate a very significantly large language and culture barrier is a sign of the unusual phenomenon that occurred, and generally speaking, grants Hokuzono another unique advantage that may have primed his manga to be launched into stardom. Typically, a manga's existence in Weekly Shonen Jump is solely contingent on how the Japanese audience receives it, with people outside of Japan only being the briefest of afterthoughts. And while I'm sure that we are still the secondary audience, with the Japanese people being the prioritized audience, the Western influence and hype was strong enough to get actual acknowledgement of its importance to the industry moving forward. This phenomenon was so loud and unignorable that it had to be acknowledged full stop. Now, this knowledge doesn't directly affect sales per se, but having Kagurabachi stick in the hearts and minds of many manga fans globally will certainly help more than it hurts in the long run. Becoming iconic for its meme status has its pros and cons, namely the fact that it has an uphill battle in getting people to take it seriously, but the give and take here seems to be more than working in its favor, as this manga gets significantly more weekly attention and buzz on the internet than any news story I've seen published in the magazine for quite a long time. On top of this, opinions on Kagurabachi's validity as a story could be swayed, as in my experiences, I've been able to comment on the manga's genuine quality and see Kagurabachi fans be converted into fans of the series before my very eyes. Now, not all of those fans will convert directly into volume sales, but a not insignificant amount does, and that happening so quickly, so early, so consistently for a series like this can only mean good things for it moving forward. Speaking of sales, Kagurabachi is doing great for itself, with only 2 volumes available for purchase or pre-order and a measly 30 plus chapters of in-story content. This manga has 200 1,000 copies in circulation, which is unprecedented to say the least. Volume 1 specifically went through multiple reprints because of how quickly this manga was flying off shelves, with some stores even limiting how many volumes an individual could buy due to the limited stock. The most recent example of a manga doing this well with its debut is Ruri Dragon, and that manga secured its spot so firmly within the magazine that the author was able to take a several-month break for the sake of their health and return to their spot as if nothing happened. This is quite the unusual accommodation for an author in this magazine, especially when Ruri Dragon only had 1 volume in circulation at the time. So Kagurabachi even being comparable to that story in any meaningful capacity is something to behold and make note of. Needless to say, I'm hopeful and confident that Kagurabachi has given itself a very firm foundation to build upon as the series continues, more volumes get released, and an eventual anime announcement creeps closer and closer. But the potential popularity is certainly there, and I would even argue that we're already seeing a volume printing machine in the making. Now, sales are important, but they certainly aren't the end-all be-all in a conversation like this, being only a third of the equation having the possibility to carry the torch, so to speak, of Shonen Jump. The second of the 3 conditions actually isn't quality or the general goodness of the manga. That'll actually be something I reserve to talk about till the end of this video, but it's actually the type of manga that the face of Shonen Jump usually is. Regardless of popularity, sales, or commercial success, it's very rare that a non-battle shonen gets held with the same regard and respect of its contemporaries in this context. Due to many years of conditioning and the general culture surrounding the magazine, I would argue Kagurabachi just being a really good manga that leans into the greatness that the battle shonen genre can offer definitely allows it to inch even closer to securing that spot at the top, even easier than it would have been able to if everything remained the same except its genre and subject matter. Other new manga have been performing just as well, or at least comparably so in recent history, like Ruri Dragon and Akane Banashi, both being manga that did extremely well relative to their initial debut. But despite their very good sales, I don't think people are willing to see them as even contenders to be the figurehead of the magazine due to their subject matter and approach to storytelling. This doesn't disqualify either manga from being good, great, or even excellent series, nor does it inherently limit how much they'll sell in the future, but consider this more of a perception requirement, more so than one that is rooted in objectivity like sales. Ruri Dragon and Akane Banashi aren't inherently worse manga than Kagurabachi because of their genre, but they do certainly lack the expected presence of a manga that will exist front and center in Shonen Jump. And if people can't believe that they're going to be the face of the manga, I don't really see it having that mainstay power that you need in order to be a One Piece, a Jujutsu Kaisen, a My Hero, or even, if you'd like to argue, a Black Clover was at some point during its tenure. I'm sure at different points in this magazine's history, non-battle shonen manga have been able to fight to get that top spot and be more unanimously recognized by fans, but consistently, it's generally gone to manga with battling and adventuring at its center. Sure, you have a couple of haikyus, a couple of slam dunks that are able to break through that barrier, but those are the exceptions to that rule, not the rule itself, and perception plays an extremely large part in Kagurabachi being able to secure this spot, potentially even more so than the actual quality of the manga itself. To clarify what I mean by that, let me use the current figurehead of the manga for example. I know plenty of consistent Shonen Jump readers that love the magazine and read it religiously, but don't care for One Piece at all. Despite that, very few of them would dispute the fact that One Piece is and has been the face of Shonen Jump for a very, very long time now. Maybe you could say My Hero, Demon Slayer, or Jujutsu Kaisen usurped that spot in some aspects at some point in their popularity and run, but it's quite obvious that Oda and his series has sat on the Shonen Jump throne uncontested for quite a long time. The quality of One Piece here, or its validity as a manga, isn't so much as important as how it's perceived by the general masses. And I would say this applies even now with manga that are good and do sell, but don't quite have the look that Shonen Jump audiences expect. On that front, Kagurabachi absolutely has this on lock. One look at Kagurabachi's most popular drawing will show you all you need to know. I mean, it's the reason the manga even got joked on into popularity to begin with, because it's almost comical how by the books this one drawing of Chihiro unsheathing his sword is. I mean, you have conventionally good art, a stoic looking protagonist, and a sword all in one image. Oh yeah, Hokuzono knew exactly what he was doing when he did this, and it'll certainly be to his benefit and the manga's benefit in the long run to have this aesthetic of a simple, basic, run-of-the-mill battle shonen but cool on its sleeve. Kagurabachi essentially embodies the essence of a series that can carry a lot of this magazine's weight on its shoulders, and because it looks like it can do it, people assume that it can do it, which creates this ongoing feedback loop that just generates more hype, controversy, or discussion around Kagurabachi and whether or not its quality is overblown. Another potential downfall or upside, depending on how you look at it, is the debate on whether or not Kagurabachi is only here because of its memes or the quality. And while I think that it's a mix of the two, I think the memes got it to where it's at in terms of the public notoriety. The quality is what kept people fans. The quality is what made the community very strong. And the quality is what's going to keep propelling this forward. Now, earlier I alluded to Kagurabachi looking generic, and while I don't think that it's that way for very long, it does have a sort of nostalgic battle shonen feel in its first few chapters that does well to allow new readers a smoother transition process. The manga plays into your expectations a bit with Chihiro and his attitude, and while it certainly begins to subvert them relatively early on, all it needs is that perception to be capable of bearing the weight of the magazine. It just needs you to be interested, for you to think that this is what you're looking for. This is the pinnacle of what a Shonen Jump manga is, or rather the epitome of what these manga are supposed to be. It has the look, and based on what we're seeing so far, it's on its way to having the recognition. But even with these two pieces on the board, I can't say that Kagurabachi could carry the load. One more piece is missing, the piece I've been talking about since the very beginning of the video, and one that is essential to generating a consistent interest in this manga past its first impression. Sure, people are looking for something like this, and sure, it can get people through the door through its popularity, but once it does, can it keep them? Now, I would let you answer that, but this is a pre-recorded video, so that's kind of impossible, so I'll do that for you and say yes. Yes, it can. I say this as someone who's been reading this manga since chapter 1, hearing all of the noise, all of the hype, and all of the jokes, and as someone who went into this manga very, very, very skeptical. I may not be the oldest manga fan in the world, but I've certainly been around long enough to see a hyped manga to get the axe despite people saying it would pop off. I've even seen manga that I personally thought were brimming with potential be cut short because they simply didn't have the motion needed to keep the higher up satisfied. Needless to say, I wasn't willing to go into this story with an entirely open mind, or rather, I didn't want to go into it with really high expectations, but slowly, Kagurabachi started melting away those inhibitions, forced open the doors, and really started to hit its stride. Now, I won't say that this series is the best thing since sliced bread, even though I really want to, but what I will say is that this manga only gets better from its inception, and it starts off in a pretty decent place. From an art standpoint, from a story standpoint, and most importantly, from a character standpoint, Kagurabachi continues to improve and improve in a way that's almost alarming considering Hokuzono's relative inexperience as a mangaka. In my mind, very few battle shonen that I've read recently or otherwise have a first 30 or so chapters that are as consistent, as good, and as foundationally solid as Kagurabachi's. I'm sure that you can name a ton, but recently, and especially recently that have performed well long term, I don't think Kagurabachi has much competition in that realm. Chihiro Rokuhiro is already a really good protagonist that's evolved past the cold and emotionless shell that has been put on display in the first couple of chapters. The level of vulnerability and emotion he is capable of showing and evoking is palpable, and I could already see him becoming one of my personal goats and long-standing favorites for a while. The antagonists in Kagurabachi are elite as well, arguably more so than Chihiro itself. Maybe it's the Batman inspiration, or maybe it's the fondness for Naruto, but for some reason, Hokuzono seems to truly understand and grasp how to present a villain with some impact, some menacing aura, and interesting dynamics with the main protagonist. 30 chapters in, and we've already got one spectacular villain and two with loads of potential that are currently being executed on to near perfection. That is impressive in and of itself. And paired with Chihiro, who interacts with each and every one of these villains very well, it makes for an extremely cool dynamic. From a character standpoint, I'd argue that it's the side cast that weakens Kagurabachi the most, but this isn't to say that it's weak in general. While currently not stacking up to the protagonist and antagonist aspect of his character writing, recently I feel that Hokuzono has been doing an excellent job of building out the world and adding a colorful cast that complements the story and its focal point extremely well. All of these good traits are then wrapped in Hokuzono's very sleek presentation and cinematic art style. Something so impactful, I had to make an entire video talking about that on its own, but to put it simply, this man has the sauce. Hokuzono really just gets it in a way that I haven't seen another artist innately be familiar with in quite a while. Now, we're in a magazine with Koei Horikoshi, so there are certainly artists with higher drawing quality in a vacuum, but when it comes to deciding what and how to depict a scene, illustrate a moment, create a feeling, as crazy as it is to say, Hokuzono has really placed himself on the upper pedestal relative to many of his predecessors and contemporaries. For how much of a rookie he is here, he genuinely knows how to compose a moment and make you feel like you're there, take you through it in a way that's genuinely mind-blowing. I say all this to say that the substance of Kagurabachi is there, the popularity is arriving, the aesthetic is there, and many of the manga that may stand in its way to be the face or cover of Shonen Jump are on their way out. And if the combination of any of these traits are anything to make predictions on, Kagurabachi has an extremely good chance of being the answer to Shonen Jump's desperate prayers. A manga that's both good and popular enough to take up the mantle, and a series with the perfect look and feel to carry on as Shonen Jump's rising star. Kagurabachi and Hokuzono continue to grow and evolve, and I, for one, am so excited to see where everything stands with this series in just a short year. If you're like me, like Kagurabachi, and want to keep seeing videos made on it discussing its quality or certain characters, subscribe, hit the bell, and check out this video I made entirely dedicated to Kenichi Sojo, one of the best new villains I've read about in recent manga.